Hi, and welcome to another episode of Emerald Isle Vacation Home Specialist. I am your host, Dennis Richkovsky. Some of you recognize me as the co-owner of Flip Flops Donuts, and some of you know me as your broker of real estate, specializing in waterfront and water view properties along the Crystal Coast, especially on Bogue Banks and in Emerald Isle, North Carolina. This episode is all about a special town in the Crystal Coast called Beaufort. Named by Travel and Leisure magazine as America's favorite town, among other accolades, Beaufort brings even more to the table than meets the eye. Dock your boat at a downtown marina and walk from one charming boutique to another. Take in some history at the Beaufort Historic Site or the North Carolina Maritime Museum, or drop your kayak in Taylor's Creek. Then relish in it all with cocktails and award-winning seafood overlooking the water at sunset. It's no wonder so many people call Beaufort their home away from home. And before I go on, there's another coastal town in South Carolina with the same spelling, but with a different pronunciation. This pronunciation for the town in South Carolina is Beaufort. Returning to North Carolina and Colonial Beaufort, this town started out as a seaport located on the North Carolina mainland about midway between the present states of Virginia and South Carolina. It was separated from the open sea by the waters of Core and Bogue Sounds, which lay between the mainland and the Outer Bank islands of Bogue and Shackleford. Separating these two islands just 2 miles south of Beaufort is Topsail Inlet, and this inlet provided the Beaufort port with access to the open sea. Now known as Beaufort Inlet, Topsail Inlet was the most navigable of all the inlets along the North Carolina coast, having a low water depth of 12 feet with an additional 4 feet at high tide. Colonial Beaufort, named for Henry Somerset, Duke of Beaufort, was first known as Fishtown because the fishing industry was and has been an important part of the town and the county's history. The economy of Colonial Beaufort was largely based upon the exploitation of a number of natural resources which were present in the area surrounding the town. One of these natural resources was the marine life which inhabits the waters of the Beaufort area in great abundance. As early as 1585, the great abundance of fish in the Core Sound area was noted, and in 1709, John Lawson listed 41 types of fish and 18 types of shellfish found along the coast of North Carolina. Most of these, which Lawson listed, were described as being useful either because of their value as food or because of some byproduct produced from them. Though they were not used for food, whales were plentiful along the coast of Beaufort back then and were an important economic factor in the area during the colonial period. The Beaufort area was also richly endowed with an extensive pine forest, and before the colonial period ended, this forest was not only being sawed into lumber, but also was being used for the production of tar and crude turpentine, two products from which rosin, pitch, and the spirits of turpentine were made. As Beaufort's reputation as a successful port town grew, so did the influx of famous pirates, including Blackbeard the pirate, Calico Jack, and Annie Bonny, one of the country's first female pirates. Blackbeard, who loved to patrol the waters near Beaufort and Ocracoke Island, and who had a home in the neighboring town of Bath, was a particularly prevalent unwanted visitor, and the region began a massive effort to put a stop to piracy along the coastline. In fact, the now iconic Fort Macon on the eastern edge of Atlantic Beach was first built in order to protect the region from pirates and as a response to foreign invasions like the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. Beaufort had a small but significant role in both the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812, and the town even produced a few heroes in these conflicts, including the legendary local captain Otway Burns. A North Carolina state senator and an American privateer, Burns attacked and effectively defeated a number of British vessels during the War of 1812 and commandeered expeditions that extended from coastal Carolina all the way to the United States Virgin Islands. Deemed a hero after the war, Captain Otway Burns was eventually buried at the old burying ground, which was established in 1731, and a neighboring town, Otway, was named after him. Both wars left Beaufort relatively intact, and the town continued to grow after both conflicts. But the Beaufort community's seemingly unending prosperity would eventually hit a setback with the onset of the Civil War. In 1862, Beaufort was invaded by Union forces, which quickly gained control of the town and set up a headquarters in the heart of the community. Occupied by Union forces for the majority of the war, Beaufort suffered few losses or damage to the town's buildings and residences, but it did halt the transport of goods for a few years while the war raged on. Once the war ended, Beaufort surprisingly bounced back quickly thanks to a backbone economy of lumber, fishing, whaling, and naval businesses. Though Beaufort has always been a busy port town, it never quite reached the gigantic portions throughout the ensuing decades like the other Carolina ports of Wilmington or Charleston. The reason for this was simply because, despite the fact that Beaufort was easy to reach for mariners and was very well established, it was a little too far away from major interior cities and settlements. And as such, the town remained somewhat small but productive for generations. Eventually, and after more than 250 years of relying on a steady industry of trade and fishing, summertime visitors began to discover Beaufort as a charming summertime resort, due to both its location and its inherent prosperity and southern hospitality. Many of the homes that were built in the 17 and 1800s still stood in Beaufort, a rarity considering that other southern towns were ravaged during the Civil War. So the town has retained its small town feel. In 1997, Blackbeard's favorite and most infamous vessel, the Queen Anne's Revenge, was discovered off the coast of Beaufort, and this led to a newfound interest in this relatively hidden gem community along the coastline of the Crystal Coast. In the late 2010s, Beaufort was officially named America's coolest small town by Budget Travel magazine, and was also heralded by other travel publications and news outlets, including Coastal Living magazine and CNN. By this point, the once hopping port town was now a hopping vacation destination, but it nevertheless retains its small town charm and its love for fishing. Indeed, one of the East Coast's biggest and most profitable fishing tournaments, the Big Rock Blue Marlin Tournament, is celebrated in Beaufort every year. And dozens of chartered fishing companies and or water tours are still based along Front Street docks. So come on down and visit Beaufort, North Carolina, and return next week to the same bat channel at the same bat time of 9 a.m. on Thursday for another episode of Emerald Isle Vacation Home Specialist.